Documenting change. This documentary is a learning process from emergency response project in KVK region of Odisha for artisanal and small-scale mining communities impacted by COVID-19. This documentary describes the learning process in establishing the emergency response project in KVK region of Odisha for artisanal and small-scale mining communities impacted by COVID-19. Since its inception in early November 2020, the project adopted an intervention strategy with continuous information gathering about its various activities, the challenges and the issues emerging from the field activities in the project sites. The information gathered during the intervention process became a source for identifying strategies of field implementations, policy directions, and helped Shraddha and local partners to a new mode of working with ASM communities. Process documentation research (PDR) was used as an open-ended, inductive process to explore a dynamic view of our project implementation and to help us to make our project respond to context-specific requirements. The purpose of our process documentation research is to share our initial dilemmas, challenges faced and mitigation measures adopted in our field experiences and some of the questions that emerge from the PDR process. This documentation cares more about the how of the implementation of the emergency response project in ASM communities than what of process impact. Process documentation kept the track of a process during the execution of emergency response project. The goal was to learn from the implementation of a short duration project in a typical emergency pandemic situation having a wider implementation. Process documentation kept the track of a process during the execution of the emergency response project. The goal was to learn from the implementation of a short duration project in a typical emergency pandemic situation having a wider implication. The learning of the process intends to help in designing our future strategy and improving the procedure in scaling of and replication. Such documentation may help future projects of similar nature. Managing processes may decrease costs, reduce time spent on activities, decrease resource associated with activities, eliminate flaws, improve efficiency, improve overall quality, increase benefit for beneficiaries. This process documentation will help your stakeholders and wide audience to realize the change in approach, behavior and attitude needs to produce desirable results, and it will provide context for process so that others can see how a project fits into the big picture of pandemic emergency response and what is its overall impact on affected people of ASM communities. We wanted to prepare a chronology of critical events in the process of project implementation. Additionally, we needed to identify factors that enabled as well as constrained project implementation and assess whether the project was consistent with its basic objectives. To achieve these objectives, we focused our investigation to the following questions. How participatory is the process of implementation? What is the outcome at the end of the project and why? Who is involved? The process research was done by 3 members who were not involved in daily project work. They focused on recording processes, organizing information, encouraging reflection, and disseminating information. The team remained close to the project objectives in order to allow for learning and adaptation as the project progressed. It was part of our team activity to make learning integral to our effort. being outsiders to project implementation, but as participant observers, they provided new and unbiased perspective to help improve processes of our project. The process documentation research used the following stages: recruiting and training the field observers on the project and its objectives who reflected the field realities, establishing close rapport and building confidence among ASM communities, community mapping and identification of the key factors influencing ASM people's participation, preparing the chronology of the major events, identification of major issues, discussion with the stakeholders, and report writing. Tools for process documentation. The following tools were used by the process researchers for capturing the process, including interviews, group discussions, videos, photographs, participant observation in communities, field diaries, etc.
For human and institutional development needs, the project engaged 10 volunteers, 5 males and 5 female participants, having previous exposure to PRA for community mapping and identifying potential beneficiary clusters. We oriented them on PRA exercise for 3 days, apart from 2-day pilot PRA exercise designed for the pandemic situation when community involvement was expected with thin attendance due to COVID-19 protocols. This initial exercise faced a major challenge from the first day. The ASM communities are under the control of left-wing extremist groups, whose followers strongly resisted implementation of the project activities. Community level meetings were held to clarify the doubts about the project activities, and they were explained that the project benefits intend to reach marginalized ASM communities. ASM youth vulnerable to left ideology were spotted and engaged to take the role of peace builders in their communities. The first couple of days were devoted in mitigating this problem, and we felt the need of engaging local players as community mobilizers, peace volunteers, and as facilitators to implement project activities. This idea in fact helped to address community issues and challenges. The trained volunteers, together with local players, identified about 2,100 ASM households, each from the districts of Subarnapur and Kalahandi, with about 10,300 ASM workers from about 70 ASM communities. The exercise was completed in 15 days by 5 teams, including male and female community leaders and frontline health workers to facilitate the process. This exercise provided strategic idea to involve frontline health workers including ASA, ANM and Anganwadi workers to carry forward our awareness activities at different levels and building our community approach to implement our project activities. While doing PRA exercise, the volunteers could list frontline health workers including ASA, ANM and Anganwadi workers working in ASM communities and involve them as much as possible in PR exercises when not many people were coming forward to participate. This exercise enabled targeted reach to 10,300 beneficiaries and coverage for awareness campaign in 70 ASM communities. Although not included as a project activity, the process encouraged us for undertaking a brief survey to measure the preparedness and awareness level of ASM communities in the KBK region to respond and cope with COVID-19 outbreak. As we had a target to assist 1,000 ASM members to download Arogya Setu app in their mobile handset, we decided to interview them to measure their awareness level as well without additional cost. We designed and used an interview schedule for the purpose and trained our volunteers for the tweet purpose of downloading and explaining about the app and interviewing them to note their awareness level on different indicators.
ଆମେ ଖାଲି ଗୋଟେ ଜିନିଷ କହିଲୁ ଏ ବିଷୟରେ ଗୋଟେ ଲେଖାରେ ଲେଖିଲୁ ବିଭିନ୍ନ ସରକାର ଯେ ଆମେ ଆମ କଥା ବି ଜଣା ଲାଷ୍ଟକୁ ରିପୋର୍ଟ ଏଇଟା ଆମ ସବୁ ଏଇଟା ଆମର କଥା କାମ କରୁଛୁ ଗବେଷଣା କରୁଥିଲା କାଣା କଲ ଡେଭଲପ ଆମେ ହେଲୁ ଦଳ ମାନେ ପରିବର୍ତ୍ତନ ନା ହେଲେ ସେମାନେ ତମର ଭିତରେ ବି କେତେ କରିଥିବେ ଯେ ପିଲାଟା ଯାଇକି ଅଲଗା ଧନ୍ଦା କରୁଛି ସେ ପୁରା ଚଲୁଛି ଆରେ ଇ ଧନ୍ଦା ଯେ କରିବୁ ଯେ ସେ ଏଇଟା ହଉ ଆମେ ବହୁତ ଜାଗାରେ ଦେଖିଲୁ ନା ନାଇଁ ସତ କଥା ଏଇଟା
The exercise generated a robust database on preparedness and awareness level of ASM communities in the KBK region to respond and cope with COVID-19 outbreak. It increased our access to relevant data for designing appropriate awareness strategy and IEC materials targeting level of education, occupation and baseline awareness level of the beneficiaries. The data from the exercise also enabled trainers and IEC resource persons to design appropriate training material for frontline health workers, SHG leaders, community leaders and pregnant and lactating women. We trained frontline community health workers. They were engaged in awareness building and preventing care of COVID-19. They played a critical role in preventing rising incidences of unwanted pregnancy, domestic violence, sexual harassment, human trafficking and child marriages in ASM communities. They also raised awareness on preventing human animal transmission in ASM communities during the spread of COVID-19.
हैं
156 trained female community health workers spread across 70 ASM communities were supported by 53 trained male community leaders and 56 trained female SHG leaders from 50 SHGs of ASM communities and 10 trained community mobilizers of the project. The frontline health workers and female SHG leaders reached 302 pregnant and lactating women in the ASM communities with the messages and follow-up counseling to protect them and their babies from COVID-19 infection. They were empowered through knowledge transfer and responded to the COVID-19 guidelines by protecting them and their babies from COVID-19 infection. The trained male community leaders and community mobilizers facilitated awareness building in communities, closely monitored the process and facilitated data collection and baseline and gender impact assessment research studies during the pandemic.
The process of baseline survey created a sense of importance, a sense of development, and a sense of ownership among ASM workers as they shared information about them for the first time, and the surveyors attached importance on them and took their consent in every steps of work. The interaction process during survey improved mutual relation, knowledge and confidence among project workers and local beneficiary households. Every interaction through baseline survey to measure the preparedness and awareness level of ASM communities, gender impact assessment survey, value chain research improved collaboration and mutual learning of project staff, community workers and ASM people. Baseline survey was first of its kind, which gathered data on the situation of ASM communities in general and increased understanding of demographic situation, local organization and power dynamics, gemstone and ASM gold trade, value chain and supply chain, local development, women's role, children's role and health situation of ASM males, females and children. This document, when circulated among community institutions, government, research institutions, universities and policy makers in government, has increased attention of policymakers and practitioners to take an informed approach to the sector for the first time. The Gender Impact Assessment Study, again first of its kind for ASM communities, increased understanding of the gendered impacts of the COVID-19 crisis on the livelihood and health of men and women in ASM communities. Gender disaggregated data provided greater understanding of the gender dimensions of impacts of the COVID-19 ASM communities, leading to improved economic outcomes for female and male miners through micro projects formulated by the CBOs or SHGs. The baseline value chain analysis and gender impact studies highlighted the need of planning and establishing sustainable alternative livelihood. The baseline value chain analysis and gender impact studies highlighted the need of planning and establishing sustainable alternative livelihood opportunities for ASM people to cope with pandemic-like crisis and institution building in ASM communities for effective interaction and knowledge sharing among ASM stakeholders. The project support was for 6 months. For alternative livelihood of ASM communities, we focused on income generating activities which should yield result within a short period of 90 to 100 days following need assessment and follow-up training of beneficiaries. The aim was piloting at least some of the activities chosen by the trained beneficiaries to get result during project life period. The project produced a capacity building training need assessment report on alternative livelihood opportunities, feasibility analysis of alternative livelihood opportunities for ASM people with a basket of options and choice, and a training manual for capacity building trainings on alternative livelihood activities. The project undertook short duration training on ASM value chain and supply chain, millet and spice processing, online agri input supply unit, online grocery shop, mushroom cultivation, floriculture, backyard poultry farming, organic nutrition garden, bamboo craft, hygienically processing dry fish. Each training was enriched with digital and business skills. The project addressed institutional need through forming a membership-based virtual ASM learning group, strengthening ASM Women SHGs group, and the key learning group activities undertaken are identifying issues faced by the ASM community, initiative to create legal frameworks for ASM formalization with minor representation, market access for ASM enterprises, supply chain transparency, standards and due diligence, access to finance, enterprise development and livelihood diversification, and addressing social and environmental impacts, women's rights, legal compliance, health and safety, land use, deforestation and ASM in protected areas. This documentary intends to bring to the fore the factors that affect the change process during project implementation. As a process, it helped project staff and stakeholders to track meaningful events in the project. The insights have proved very useful in formulation of new projects. It is likely to lead to more effective innovations in future projects. It will facilitate to scale up, replication and adaptation of similar projects in other locations and contexts. It will contribute to achieve wider development and sustainable goals. Documenting change has proved vitally important activity for learning from emergency response project implementation. Documenting how the change processes unfolded has provided new and strong insights for learning and practice of all stakeholders, including ASM Learning Group and newly formed Association of Women in Artisanal and Small Scale Mining, AWI-ASM. Process documentation in brief has generated a theory of change in the emergency response project, that is, the underlying assumptions and explicit ideas about how change is expected to take place in the project and human institutional development in implementing emergency response projects in the wider contexts